Good afternoon. My name is Jay Rose Pepe, City Council member. Today is Thursday, August 28th, and it's the Land Use Committee meeting. I'd ask everybody to introduce themselves.
Eric Warden, City Council.
Rob Patansu, Mayor.
Nick Bond, Community Development Director.
Jim Fisk, Principal Planner.
We have a published agenda. Does anybody wish to add an item to the agenda? I have one at the end, the signage. This goes to the flags, and I'll explain it when I got it. I got a complaint, so I'll bring it up. Okay, go ahead, Nick and Jim.
Jim, you going to take the first one?
Yeah, sorry, I was muted. Sure. We adopted the middle housing ordinance in June. It became effective in July. We had routed everything to Commerce ahead of adoption, and they indicated everything was up to par with the recent legislation. And then shortly after the effective date, which was July 1st, we received an email from Commerce giving us a little bit more guidance on the middle housing ordinance, specifically for ADUs. And so we kind of pushed back a little bit, and then they came back and said, well, these are just merely suggestions in making ADUs more affordable. And so I've included that email in your packet, but we wanted to bring this to your attention to see if you wanted us to address our issues with additional code amendments, or leave it as it is, because currently the code as it was adopted satisfies that legislation. They're just looking to make ADUs and the building of them a bit easier, I think.
I looked at it and I read it, went through the packet. I guess my comment would be, if there is a way to make it more affordable and easier, if it's not going against something that's against what we're doing in the city or want to go, I'm in favor of changes that would make it easier. But I'm looking for some feedback from you guys.
Well, I have my opinions on it.
Go for it.
They bring up a potential conflict with the density. I don't really see that as an issue. I talked to somebody else at Commerce, as well as the city attorney, and they agreed that our approach is correct as far as the R1 zone. That's really the only district it would apply to. And then the design requirements, I guess it's a policy choice if the city wants to just build boxes for people to live in, or if they want to create place. And so I think if you go out to certain developments, you can see where they're building ADUs. And there's some blank walls and things like that kind of detract from that common space, that social space, which should be the street. And so some of the stuff that's built into the code applies, well, it all applies to detached houses, also applies to ADUs, so that they're built similar to a detached house with the same kind of architectural features.
Yeah. Aaron?
Yeah, when I first started hearing about ADUs, I was picturing something that matches somebody's home, a design that matches their house. Basically like a detached garage almost, right? But it's living conditions. And then we have McCormick building, dozens and dozens of basically ADUs. And it's just kind of confusing to me. I just think people are going to start building these things, and we're going to start changing kind of like our standard, so people can just build a bunch of small little units and rent them out, small little rentals, versus something that's going to add to your property so that your grandkids or your parents or generational living can continue to be able to afford shelter. I was kind of confused by how it started and now how it's kind of turned into something different. And I don't really, I like the concept. I wish my property had more, and I'd put one on here as well. But just kind of confused the direction that it's going. I mean, am I wrong, Rob? Did you kind of think the same thing?
Well, I think you're onto something there, that
Yeah.
that we have design standards for a reason. And I too want to see these as affordable as they can be. And the huge step we took was, the pre-approved plans. I mean, we're saving people $20,000-$30,000, right off the top there. I really would hate to see unsightly boxes that don't meet design standards. I mean, they ought to fit into the neighborhood or in some form, So that's where I lean. I don't have a vote on the matter, but I think you're onto something there, that they shouldn't be unsightly. Otherwise we're kind of destroying the character of our neighborhoods.
So what I'm hearing is basically there's not anything that we need to change to our current code, or any interest that people would like change in our current code moving forward. I would I don't mean to paraphrase or speak ill, but I think, Nick, if I'm quoting you wrong, please let me know. When I asked you, when we had as a pre-approved plans come out, basically I said, wow, is this going to start a building boom? And you said, be lucky if there's 50 done in a year in Kitsap County overall. So I don't want to be chasing our tail on this. I don't think we're going to see a big outpouring of it. And if there's nothing that we're required to change, I'm happy with it as is. Eric?
No, I mean, I'm fine with sticking with the direction we're currently going.
I think it's important to note too that we have the largest concentration of these being built anywhere in the county, probably more than the entire county combined, with the 300 of them that are being built. It's really cool. We need that missing middle housing. It wasn't being built, and they're leasing them up as fast as they're building them. So I think it's cool that it's happening in Port Orchard, but we got more of it going on than anybody.
Yeah, I think, Eric, you touched on a point too. I think that there's a big distinction between people building them for affordable housing and people building them for rentals. And we'd rather have them built for affordable housing than rentals if we can. If we let the design standards go, I think we'll see more of the rental area.
Yeah, for personal, my sister in the county, she's got a beautiful place, a huge detached garage with a 3-bedroom apartment above it that my son and his wife actually rent from them because they travel so much. It's a great place for them to live. Below that, my disabled uncle lives there. It's fantastic for someone like that. There's a purpose for the ADUs to help our family and give them affordable places to live, especially that 18 to probably 25 age group when you're just trying to get started. I definitely get that, but I just think that people are going to start building these in these little neighborhoods, and we're gonna have these little box neighborhood houses that are just going to be rentals, and I definitely don't want our city to turn into that. So.
All right.
That's all I got.
All right, Nick or Jim, anything else on this item? Think we've kind of said move forward with what we got. Public notice signs.
Well, I'll jump in on this one. Councilmember Diener had asked that we have a conversation about this, and I believe that his concern was with the removal of the signs, but he also received an email from somebody concerned that you can't read the signs while you're driving. And so I think we have two issues. The removal of the signs is a code enforcement issue, and just writing courtesy letters to people telling them to remove the signs and potentially having some code to back you up in the event that the city wanted to remove them. And so we're going to look with our attorney at making sure that we can do that. I think that it is helpful to have those signs up through the permitting process, but once a decision has been issued, they should come down within a reasonable amount of time. But we have a notice of application that goes up first, and then there might be a public hearing notice later. And so by keeping those up through the process until a decision has been reached, maybe somebody who missed the first comment window, they'll still see the sign and be able to get information about an active permit. As far as the citizens who might be driving by a sign and don't feel safe getting out of their car to go read what it says, or don't have a place to pull over, I think that those signs are located within the city of Port Orchard, and if somebody sees a sign that is concerning to them, they need to reach out to the city and say, hey, there's a public notice sign here. I can't see what it says from the road. But I don't think we want to be putting up billboards. And if you make these signs any bigger, you're going to have such a big wind load that you're going to need reinforced posts with concrete. You're going to have to pour concrete to support a sign that gets much larger than they are. And sometimes the ones we have, if we get a windstorm, they fold in half and don't always weather the storm either. So I think the signs that we have are about as big as we can make them without adding considerable cost to the sign, and in terms of making it survive winds. And I would recommend that we don't increase the sign size, but we can certainly pursue some additional enforcement. And if that doesn't sound right, please let me know.
And if I may, I think it would be a public safety concern. I don't think we want people reading these signs when they're driving down the road. It's to draw your attention to it, and Nick's right. If we, we're here to answer questions. If people have a concern and they can't, you should be able to park somewhere and walk to it. They're typically, all along a frontage somewhere.
I want to ask a basic question. But my ignorance will show on this one. Whose responsibility is the signage, and what is the requirement for it to stay up? Because I fully agree. I've had that question, or not question. I've wondered it several times where, we see the signage, there's no activity for a god awful long time. The sign gets beat up. Whether the one that Scott was addressing specifically is the one that was on Old Clifton that went down. Is it the builder's responsibility, ours? I'm not in favor of making the signs any larger. I have gotten out of my car to look at signs or contacted the city and said, what's going on, on in this area. Do we by any chance have like not a page, but someplace people would go where they could see, the notices? Because if so, I believe that, makes it done there, that we're being transparent by posting them. So what's the answers on some of those questions?
Well,
Yes, we have a page where you can see all the public notices. So those should be getting updated as soon as we send out a notice. They should be added to the public notices page. The city actually purchases the blank signs that just say public notice with the lines for being written on.
Yeah.
We wanted developers to fill out the signs themselves, but they didn't do a very good job. So we're actually writing the information in marker on the signs, and then they pay for the sign and pick it up. And so we buy these in bulk at like 500 signs at a time. And then we charge, I think, $50 or so for the sign as part of the permit fee. And so when the sign is ready to be posted, we let them know that we've inserted the information and that they can come pick it up. It is their responsibility to put up the sign and ensure that it stays up. We're not out there checking them. So if somebody calls us and says, hey, I noticed a public notice sign blew down and it's not the end of the comment period, we will call the owner and tell them to put it back up. And honestly, if there was a public hearing notice up that fell down and somebody missed the opportunity to testify because of that, it's the developer has to make sure that they follow our process, and that could jeopardize their permit approvals or force them to have to redo a step if that was a flaw in the permitting process. Jim, anything I missed?
No, part of my question on that also, because two signs in McCormick Woods were defaced by, sorry, Eric, I'll get to you in a second, apologize. Were defaced by graffiti. That's why I was kind of wondering who was the responsibility. Eric?
Nope. my wife wanted me to ask that question that you just covered, about the graffitied signs, going back there. And that was my question. I was, who is responsible for the signs when they're torn down on the ground? Is that something that you would want, people to see Click Fix on? Call it in. If you see that, just call it in. Okay. And then when someone like the McCormick ones, which have been up for a while and they're going to be up for a while, I bet. When they get graffitied like that, defaced, the developer pays $50 each time that they have to get rewritten and put back up.
Yeah, if the sign was made illegible, we could ask them to replace the sign and put a new one up. But if the comment period has lapsed, or the public hearing has already happened, then that probably wouldn't be required. But I'm not sure that we've even been informed that there are signs that have been defaced. So Click Fix is one way. I mean, emailing our department, either the permit center or the contact information that's actually on the sign, and say, hey, I noticed the sign, has spray paint on it. We can certainly look at it, and if it no longer is readable, we can have the developer replace it at their cost.
Sounds good. Thanks.
And as far as the removal, Nick and I and Charlie had a little conversation about this today, and I was talking to Jim at the beginning of before the meeting started. I think going forward, we're going to put a condition in the process that they have to remove it, and if they don't, they're going to have to pay a fee, and we're going to do it. But these ones that have been, there's some out there that have been out there 5-6 years, and some and that just aren't getting removed. And Nick's concerned about trespass. Charlie doesn't really have any huge concerns about that because they're on the edge of the right of way, even though it's on their property. If we write them a code enforcement letter and tell them, hey, you need to remove this sign, and if you don't, code enforcement's going to come and do it, we probably have very little risk as far as somebody being concerned about trespass, because it's not like we're going 50 feet onto their property. We're going 5 feet probably onto their property and taking this sign, leaving the post behind, but taking the corrugated sign. A lot of these ones that are left long term and get ignored, somebody who's a developer has tied up a piece of property, they didn't close on it, and they're working through their entitlements, and then the project doesn't move forward, and then they disappear, and then this piece of raw land, whoever is probably an absentee owner, and they're just not aware that this stupid sign is still here, and the person that paid for it has gone away.
Well, there are requirements that you guys are stating, to put them up. Can we put a requirement when they purchased it to take them down, or is that in place and we're just not enforcing it? Or
we intend to do that, but it's these ones that but it's the historic ones that we're probably going to I intend to turn code enforcement and ask code enforcement to write letters, before we just go take the sign off of somebody's property, because we write them a letter, tell them they need to remove it, but if they don't, we're going to.
Yeah.
Because I want to get rid of them. They're ugly.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'm going to share my screen here. This is what is attached to every sign that we give the applicants to post. And in here, there is language about removal and maintenance. And so this all really has to do with either the decision being issued or if the project is withdrawn or canceled. But it does say it's the applicant's responsibility. Those folks are aware that they're required to do this, but they don't always do it. So perhaps, having code enforcement go out there and do it is the way to go.
And Bill, I love it. I'm all in favor of that, and I think it would help beautify our city a little bit in some areas.
Yep. I agree.
Okay. All right. Multi-family tax exemption.
All right. So in your packet, we have provided a map and a draft code for bringing back the multifamily tax exemption program. I did meet on Tuesday with the KBA to go over this with them and answer their questions. And You'll probably get some comments from them. I'll touch on that later, but I want to start with the map. And Jim, I don't know if you have the map handy that you can share your screen. What we did was we started with the center's boundaries as they exist in the comprehensive plan. Their centers in our comprehensive plan are based on PSRC criteria, which are not based in anything in state law. In the MFTE statute, there is a provision that says that to designate a target area for multifamily tax exemption, it must be in an urban center, but it doesn't define what an urban center is. So I think the intent of what state law requires and what PSRC has created as a center's framework are similar, but they don't mean the same thing. So we're starting off with this map by just mapping our centers. And then we've chosen to expand the target area around downtown and out towards Annapolis, where you have more of a gridded street system, where infill development and middle housing is easier to build because you have alleys, and there probably are older and more run-down homes potentially that could be redeveloped. So this is really our first cut at a map, and we wanted to see how the land use committee felt about this and whether this made sense. We did not include anything in McCormick Woods in this area, even though there is a local center out at McCormick Woods. We felt like that is master planned and there are agreements in place and we don't need to be providing an additional tax incentive out there. But everything from Glenwood Road and Highway 16 east is included as far as our designated centers and then that older part of the city. So I'll stop there and just let's talk about the map first, and then we'll jump into the code.
Okay.
Nick, is this include UGA?
This is not UGA. This is only the city. So
Okay.
the dark black line is the city boundary. And you can see the parcels are white or green within the city, and they are gray within the county, with the exception I see that Long Lake is also white.
Okay.
I got a question on the code side. So map wise, we made some changes from I think you made some changes from when we did the original tax exemption, correct? Because I thought we had more downtown Port Orchard in there.
We did. Well, this includes downtown still, but the old map, we actually had 3 different maps. And so we had one map for affordable housing. We had one map for redevelopment. And then we had one map for just 8-year exemptions that didn't have a lot of strings attached. And we have instead said, look, if we're going to offer MFTE, let's offer all of the types of MFTE. And we'll jump into the code requirements because they are different. But I think having one map simplifies the process. And if somebody wants to build a project that qualifies for 8-year and meets the criteria for 8-year, that's fine. If they want an extra 4 years, they've got to do everything that 8-year requires plus affordable housing.
Yeah, I think it simplifies it. That's for sure. You're right. I'm sorry. I looked at the wrong part of the map on
Okay.
that.
And you will notice we didn't bother to go through and remove like schools and churches and
Right.
other more institutional properties. So South Kitsap High School is in this, and we know that that's probably not going to develop, but it's within our center. And so, you know, if the school district ever decided to surplus a piece of property, we don't have to amend the map. But we know that housing is not likely to go there. And there are properties here which may not even allow the type of housing that we're talking about because maybe it's zoned R1 or Greenbelt, but it's within a center boundary. So this doesn't guarantee that you can do multifamily housing. It does allow the tax exemption though.
Hey, Eric, go ahead, because I got a question afterwards. What you
Yeah,
just said, Nick.
And Nick, you're still saying that the 8-year, the 8-year, correct? Not the 12-year is what.
Well, the ordinance has both
now.
an 8. It has an 8 and a 12-year in there, so you can do either 8 or 12-year in all of these areas, and we'll talk about the criteria for each when we get to the code.
Okay.
So the main question is, should this be expanded at all, or does this feel about right? And
from my perspective, it feels about right. I mean, it certainly seems to be more of what it combined the maps before it makes it. I'm just wondering, I know it's extra work, but you know, should we eliminate those places like green belts and stuff? You know, so it doesn't give somebody excuse how they may look at it. You know, like, well, you said it could, you know, could be an exemption. I didn't know it was a green belt. I don't know.
Yeah, we actually added language to the code to disclose that says just because your property is in the map does not guarantee that the land use code allows the type of multifamily development that, you know, is incentivized. But if we need to go through the mapping exercise, we can. It's just going to be a bit more work, and it's going to become more of a patchwork map.
But it'd be more realistic, wouldn't it?
It would, yep.
Okay, that's the way I would lean. Eric, got a druther?
That's the way I would lean. Yep.
All right, you want to talk about code?
Yeah, let me, I'm just toggling through my documents here. So the approach that we've taken, and I did include some comments in the margin in the draft ordinance, just indicating what changed and where it changed. The old framework included, as I mentioned, both an 8-year and then our 2 8-year and 1 12-year maps that differed. Instead of that, we now have one map, and the criteria from the 8-year to the 12-year exemption are layered. So everything that is required to get an 8-year exemption is also required of a 12-year exemption, plus the 12-year exemption would have to provide affordable housing. So if you go to, and I apologize, these pages, oh, they are numbered, it's just at the top of the page. If you go to page 7 of 15 of the draft ordinance, there's some text highlighted in red, and it says project performance standards and form, and talks about what types of projects are eligible. And this is what we discussed in the work study meeting in July. The first option, option 6A, says that the multifamily housing project is in a mixed-use shopfront type building containing ground floor commercial uses measuring at least 4,000 square feet, or 40% of the building's footprint, whichever is less. And so that's ensuring that we're getting those mixed-use type buildings that our plans and our codes call for. But that's just one way. So you get to you have to meet one of the following options. So 6B would be the building is at least 4 stories tall, which we are having trouble getting buildings taller than 3 stories because you're typically putting in elevators. And then it also includes a density requirement that the site would be 40 units per acre, which 30 units per acre is about the maximum that you can build without building structured parking, either part of the parking being underneath the building or all of it. And so that really puts you into at least having less surface parking, if not eliminating surface parking. And it's giving us more building height, which again is increasing the assessed value per acre and setting up the city for longer term financial success. And then the final option C, or sorry, there's 2 left. Option C is the middle housing type projects. And so on small lots, we did say that this is only on lots that are less than 15,000 square feet. And we're still, we were talking about 12,000 square feet, but this is really about infill development in these older parts of the city. And this is for projects that would contain between 4 and 12 multifamily units. So townhomes or stacked flats or one of the other middle housing types. So that would be a different type of project that doesn't have to be 4 stories, but is otherwise a small scale middle housing project. And then finally, there is an option for projects that just 100% of any on-site parking is below grade. And so that means that there would be 0 surface parking. And that takes away the 4-story requirement. But because all parking is below grade, you're still getting higher assessed value per acre by maximizing site coverage and using more of the site to be covered with an apartment building. So so those apply to all 8-year exemptions as well as all 12-year exemptions. And then section 7 on page 8 of 15 of the ordinance then lists the criteria for the 12-year exemption, which is exactly as it was before repeal, except that we're now saying that the units have to be rented for 25% below fair market value rather than 10% below fair market value. So it's a much more substantial savings to a tenant compared to the previous framework. And you have to do one of the building examples from that menu 6A through D. So you're getting more value and affordable housing for those extra 4 years. I will tell you that in my conversations with the Kitsap home builders, there was a little bit of pushback on the idea that you need to do a 4-story building to qualify. They said that, you know, our 3-story projects barely pencil as it is because fees are so high. And, you know, they said this isn't going to solve our problem or isn't really what we want. You know, they understand the effort on mixed use buildings and downtown. And, you know, they say that, you know, it makes sense. But ultimately, if we're looking at this from the developer's perspective, at some point, we have to look at how much are they giving up to qualify for this program compared to what return they could make through other investments. And at some point, this isn't going to move the needle for them or incentivize them to do something. So I asked that they communicate that to the city council, and they mentioned the possibility of doing an MFTE perspective presentation from their perspective to talk about what their performance look like and really trying to illustrate how the math works from a developer's perspective. And so we may see some comments from them to that effect. But I think overall, they're happy to see that we're talking about it and that we're looking to bring it back. But I think that the other thing I'll say is that they really felt like we needed to emphasize more of the other tax benefits of having having more units built, from one-time fees to sales tax revenue to utility tax revenue, and just adding ratepayers to our system. They said that you're not really accounting for all of those benefits relative to the cost of this program in terms of a tax shift, and they feel like the value of that is much higher than sort of how we're presenting it or discussing it. So,
Nick,
you
to
know,
that point though, I would argue we're struggling to keep up with our infrastructure. That
Mhm.
isn't a value to us right now. That's a concern. If I open that valve farther,
Yeah.
you know, this is, you know, I hear their concerns, but my goodness, it wasn't moving the needle on the affordability on what we had before. And this might not be for everybody, but I argue that that isn't a benefit to us because we're struggling to get water rights, and sewer isn't as big as issue as water, but that's it's probably not a benefit to us.
Yeah, and I did push back on that, and I also said, look, if you're going to start trying to put dollar amounts on the value of all of these other ancillary benefits of growth, you also have to look at all the costs of growth in terms of policing and the operational aspects of the city. And I said that's a pretty large study to both take in the benefits and then to also take away the costs of possible development from this program. But they said that they had some information and they were hoping to share that. So I think this is probably a balanced approach because if they said we love it and you've done everything exactly the way we wanted, we might be giving away too much. I think this reintroduces a program. It certainly brings the incentives we want for downtown and redevelopment downtown and also for middle housing, and doesn't necessarily pour gasoline on the fire of garden apartments.
Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. So 8 years, 8 years is that 15%? What's 8 years that they have to allot for of the low income or affordable housing?
8 years does not include any affordable housing. You just have to build
automatic. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I have a question about Kitsap home builders. Since it's been brought up and their opinions valued. I definitely, my son works for a developer. I mean, in town that builds apartments. I know we have some, but is Kitsap home builders? I've always thought it was like more residential. Is it a large commercial, a residential commercial as well?
Yeah, they have developers who are members who do commercial and multifamily development as well as single family, and some of their members also own and operate rental properties. And that was one of the things that Marianne Weber emphasized to me is she says, look, the developer isn't the one who's receiving the tax benefit. It's the owner of the apartment complex, which the developer may build this and then sell it to somebody who operates it. And the tax
Right.
benefit is an operational benefit, not something that the developer is receiving.
Yeah, and basically it's investors is what it is, right? I mean, that's what it is. A bunch of investors that don't live around here. Just to be real about it. So I don't know. Like, I hear a lot of what the kids at home builders say, and I do value what they're saying, but when it comes to commercial property, it's not my mindset. What I do on daily, it's not the same thing. So all right. Anyhow, so back to the 12 years, we're gonna up that to 25%. Is that correct? To what it previously was?
Yeah, so previously, so HUD publishes fair market rent data every year, usually in June or July, and that data says what is the average fair market rent based on household size. And so so that's, and that's like $1,500 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment is what it says for a family of 1 or 2. So we're saying you have to rent, we said before you have to rent the unit for 10% below HUD fair market rent, including the utility costs. So so that's probably $150 to $350 discount per month because it includes utilities.
Yes.
Off of fair market rents, assuming that Port Orchard's rents are representative of the fair market rents for Kitsap County, which I think the rents here might even be a little bit low to begin with. So so the tenants are receiving a modest discount on the rent by increasing the requirement from a 10% below fair market rent to 25% below fair market rent. You're giving quite a bit more savings for those affordable units that would be in the complex. So you're potentially knocking then closer to $700 off the rent, which is definitely moving the needle for somebody at the margins who can't afford housing. But again, I think the home builders said, look, the extra 4 years probably isn't worth it to us at that cost. So they may come back and ask to set that at 15 or 20% to say, okay, we understand maybe it's a little low, but I think at some point we have to look at is anybody even going to take this offer if we truly are trying to encourage affordable housing, which, as I mentioned in our presentation, the affordable tax exemption is a whole lot more work for staff in the city than the 8-year exemption. So part of me, it's my job to ensure that we have an adequate supply of affordable housing, but this particular tool does create a ton of work for us and additional staffing demands. So how much do we want to encourage the use of this tool if it's actually really labor intensive?
And I thought you said that it doesn't really pencil by doing it less than that for the tax breaks that they get versus the units that they're putting out.
Right. I think when we did the case study for the Overlook Apartments, I believe that their total 12-year savings was in their $850,000 range, and the total rent relief to tenants was about $100,000.
Correct.
So they're getting an 8-to-1 ratio on savings to rent relief. And so the 25% is designed to bring that closer together so that they're still getting significant tax savings, but we're getting the tenants who are renting in these buildings are getting significantly more rent relief.
Yes. I like the larger number.
A couple questions, just bear with me. I think it's important to, basically call it what it is. It's a subsidy. And I think it's important to know what that subsidy amount is going to be for our existing population at some point. And at the same time, after the exemption lapses or is over, then what's the benefit to the city? When will we be making up what we're losing? I don't need those answers now. It's just a couple of questions. The other item is we can keep emphasizing
Okay,
how.
let's address them. I mean, that.
Okay, if you want to address
They're
them now,
not tough. They're not
go
tough
for it.
questions.
I didn't know you had specifics on those.
It's a math equation, and
Yep.
Noah touched on that in that presentation on what those, but
Mhm.
they do roll off in 8 to 10 years or 8 to 12 years, depending on which tool. I don't know that we're going to see a lot of usage of the 12, but the 8, if we don't, in particular, the areas we're not seeing mixed use projects. We're not seeing anybody chomping at the bit to do a project downtown. If we don't do something to create some incentives, we won't see mixed use projects. We'll continue to see garden apartments. So the long-term benefit to the city is huge because that building with a structured parking garage that uses more of the site and it versus surface parking is providing way more property tax to the city, which then in turn is services to our community. It's just in the short run, you're right, there's a subsidy.
Okay, well, I know, but I mean, if somebody says, hey, I'm paying for that project, I'd really like to know, what are you paying? What they're paying? Because
Well, and
we've got
we
an
can-
answer to that.
Yeah.
We can try to estimate it, but the example in the paper from the Bremerton project gives you only find out what the actual cost is every year when the taxes are reassessed.
I know. That's what I'm saying is, I just want to call it what it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a subsidy,
Yeah, because
and we got to realize that that's what we're going to do. On
because
that.
what you're paying,
other-
the difference is, Jay, is like what you're paying is when someone says, why am I paying for that apartment? Well, you're not. But someone who's building a home today in any neighborhood in Port Orchard, they are paying those fees, and the apartment's not paying. So they are saying, why am I paying that? But the apartment complexes aren't paying that.
So remember, this is a tax shift. So
True.
the way that our assessor works is every property owner in Port Orchard is going to have a proportionate share of the taxes that would have been paid for that building for 8 years is going to be shifted proportionately based on valuation to all of the property owners in the city. It doesn't matter whether it's new development or existing residents. Everybody's going to pay a little bit more. But I think the really intangible thing is that by adding that building to the city, you're also adding ratepayers. So you're putting downward pressure on our utilities and the need to raise utility fees, utility monthly rates by bringing additional customers in. So it's almost like self-mitigating. You're going to pay more in property tax, but you're actually going to avoid increases in your utilities and potentially other fees to pay for services. So Jay, to answer your question, we can definitely get a pretty good estimate of how much property tax is shifting, but actually figuring out how the benefits of that project help existing residents, that's a really difficult exercise.
No, and let me back up the bus for a minute. I'm asking these questions because they're questions we're going to get. Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
okay, so it's.
If I remember the presentation correctly,
I remember it, Rob.
Yeah, it was $5 or $10, wasn't it?
It was more than that. But the point of it is, when we say we're not raising taxes, yes, we are raising taxes, whether we like it or not. But here's the benefit to the city. Here's the benefit to you as a resident, which you just talked about, Nick. We just can't make it sound like it's a wash. It's not. Okay. If we assume it, I'm fine with it. So I was just making a point. All right. So let me finish with my one. The other item is, we talk about growth and we look at, there's a difference to me between growth and revitalization. Are we looking at this both from a revitalization standpoint or a growth standpoint? Because if it's a growth standpoint, that's one of the issues that we have right now is possibly too much growth. So if we go with the 8 and the 12, are we accelerating our growth when we really, we're kind of on the cusp about which way we want to go with our, because of our infrastructure. I got a couple more guys, so just jump on that one first.
I think that's a fair point, and that's, you know, why the map boundaries are really important, because you know, we have these centers where we are targeting growth in the city, which includes Ruby Creek and the 2 centers on Bethel. And that's, you know, if you're not trying to encourage growth there, are you revitalizing that area, or you have so much greenfield type property, you're really developing it for the first time. So if you wanted to narrow the boundary to just include, you know, redeveloping some of the more rundown houses in the vicinity of Forest Park Grocery, or off of Perry or Farragut, where you have some decent views and some nicer houses and some less nice houses, this is an opportunity to revitalize those areas as well as our downtown. But you're in some of the other neighborhoods, you really are talking more. This is just growth that is going to be supported with an incentive.
And I think
Yeah.
what we're trying to do with this tool is we don't want to see the garden apartments. So we're not going to offer this to the garden apartments, because that's what they'll build if we don't give them some incentives to build tall. I think we, out in Ruby Creek, I'd like to see really tall buildings out there. We're not going to block anybody's view. We've got it right next to a transit center. It's a perfect location for really good density, but nobody in Kitsap County is really building tall buildings.
Right. So you brought up something earlier, Nick, and something that can be quantified. What is the, you know, one of the reasons that we were looking at not doing 12, or at least I am, is because of the reporting requirements addition. That I hate to use the word onerous, but I'll use it right now. That it's a pain in the rear, and that's one of the reasons I'm against the 12 as opposed to the 8. Could you expand a little bit more about what that would mean to impact on you?
Well, I talked to the city of Bremerton a little bit about this, because they're one of the few cities in Kitsap that are operating a program, and they're one of their most senior planners, not their director, because in Port Orchard, at least up to this point, I've mostly been doing the reporting side of this. Jim has been doing a lot of work on the contracting side when we're actually putting these things into place. But it does take a senior level person to do the work. It is complex, and isn't something that can be done clerically. The Bremerton estimated that they have one senior level planner FTE that is spending about 10% of their time on an MFTE program. So it's not a full body, but it is a chunk of somebody's job.
And we're having problems finding those people, correct?
The market has gotten considerably better for planners in the last 6 months compared to a year ago. At least there are fewer jobs that I'm seeing posted in Washington for planners compared to a year ago.
Fair enough. Okay, my next question, I'm going down, sorry guys, I wrote some out. When we talked about the four height of the on that, because as you mentioned that you know, anything 4 stories requires an elevator. Then I was also worried about how would this impact where our height requirements are for the city. So you're looking them more toward the south end of the city, outside of the area.
Yeah, so we have height overlays where we
Right.
allow additional height, and the mayor mentioned Ruby Creek.
Mhm.
The Bethel centers both have 4 and 5 story height allowances depending on where you're at in those centers. And then the downtown we have, which are mixed use buildings, so they qualify for the incentive without hitting 4 stories, but there are 4 and 5 story areas downtown that would not have to be mixed use and would qualify, as well as mixed use properties that would qualify under the mixed use tag criteria.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of not, I just, where I'm standing is, I'm definitely in favor of the exemption, realizing that there's gonna be some opinions on it. But, you know, I would really like to hold to our, I think we had that at what, 25% at one level for the exemption, because if we're gonna do it, we need to make sure that it's, you know, that we're getting it for affordable housing if we're doing the growth, you know, on that side. So that's kind of where I'm at. I'm not excited about the 12, but we can always revisit programs down the road like we have before. Eric, my point of it is, let's bring it to the council.
Yeah, I definitely want it to be 25%. And if we have to, for staffing, has to go through all that work and everything, and we're gonna take a huge, we're taking a huge loss, that's $600,000 difference or whatever, but it needs to be worth it. And we need to, if we're gonna bring in affordable housing, that 15%, whatever it was, I keep saying that number, I apologize, but whatever it was, it's not enough, so 25% is definitely more appealing from my view.
So right now we have this scheduled for a September work study for full council discussion. So we wanted to vet things with the land use committee, and then this will move to the full council in September. And it's going to come forward as is, with the exception that Jim will work on trying to pull some of the properties off the map, which shouldn't be shown for multifamily tax exemption. We'll have to play with that and see what makes the most sense. I think pulling the schools and institutional properties out makes a lot of sense. Where it gets tricky is where you have the height overlay districts, where some properties may not allow a 4-story building, and then we have to look at whether mixed use buildings are allowed. So we may leave those properties in, but we're going to have to go through a mapping exercise. But we'll try to refine it some.
Question.
Go ahead.
All right. This is kind of a really weird question. When we put apartment complexes in areas, or we don't put them anywhere, but when we zone things for that, do we look at how we're flooding certain schools, or is that really more for the school district to move their bound? Yeah, Jay, right? That's more for
district.
that's
I
for
did
them to
2
move
of
their
those.
boundaries around. Okay.
Yeah, I chaired 2 of those committees.
Yeah, as I was about to ask the question, I thought that's more for the district. All right, move forward. Yeah.
I can just share that, the school district hires a demographer every year. And one of the things that we're seeing is that, which sort of surprised me, but there are a lot of people whose kids will go through the school system, but the parents don't move out of their house. The kids just move on and move into other, move to college or other cities. And we're seeing a lot of new units that come in that don't have children living in these units. So a lot of the apartments that are being built don't have a lot of kids. And so even though we're having all this growth, the demographer really isn't showing as much. It's surprisingly less impact than I would have imagined based on how many units we're building. So they rerun those numbers annually, and it's not as linear as you might expect based on how we're growing as a city.
Okay, so I'll add to that discussion, since I got to chair 2 committees for changes real quick. One is every neighborhood, as you might imagine, has an ebb and flow with kids. Cormac Woods was supposed to be an empty nester, and they found out that 60% of the houses when they built them had kids, and that drove up a lot of what the impact on Sunny Slope. And then they were concerned about the development by, I'm sorry, I apologize, by Burger King, the apartment complex, and that had like 0 kids. So it's an ebb and a flow, and it depends on the type of development, the housing that comes in. So yes, leave it to the demographers on that one. One last thing on this subject, and then I'll let it go. Either Jim or Nick, if you could tell us what the time frame is on the recording on this discussion. I'd like to send it out to the council to look at before we have our work study. This was a good discussion, and I really appreciate it. Okay, co-living housing.
Yeah, so among all of the mandates given to us by the legislature, there was one that flew under the radar and I did not learn about until relatively recently. We have a January 1st or December 31st deadline this year to ensure that our code does not prevent co-living. And this includes uses like the Amici House, which was recently built in Port Orchard. And so Jim is just starting to go through the code and draft some changes, and I'll let Jim provide some additional detail, but it's not a super I don't think we're changing a lot of code, but there's a lot of sections that we have to comb through and make sure that there's nothing that conflicts with this law. And really, it is just about these shared living situations and making sure that our code doesn't prevent that from happening. Jim, do you want to expand?
Sure. So co-living housing, it's residential development where you have individually rented lockable sleeping units and they all share a common kitchen facility. So House Bill 1998 requires that we allow this wherever we permit six multifamily units or more. So that's really R3 and all the mixed use districts. The state building code, we cannot change anything that's otherwise required for the state building code. So no larger minimum room or unit sizes, no required unit mix, and no forced mixed uses. The bill has some parking restrictions, but I think that what we did as part of the middle housing ordinance is going to satisfy that. We also cannot have different processes that are any stricter than what we would have for multifamily. So if an apartment does not require conditional use, then these co-living facilities cannot require that either. So I've identified a few sections. There's a couple ways we could do this, but the sections that I think we need to touch are the definitions in 2012, the use provisions in 20.39. And Nick mentioned the Amici House, the congregate living facility. This is something that would fall into that. Right now, congregate living facilities require conditional use. They're permitted in R2, but there's some restrictions in as far as their proximity to transit, if it's in a center, that sort of thing, that we would have to repeal those restrictions for congregate living and make it part of the co-living definition. Parking and permitting kind of touched on that. So in 2039, should create a distinct use line, eliminate the conditional uses. And we'll touch on 20.25 to update the tables to show the same review type. Our code is a form-based code. We don't have the density accounting, except for in the R1, 2, and 3, we introduced that unit density. But otherwise in the mixed use districts, we do not have a cap on density. But each sleeping unit in this bill is counted as 0.25 dwelling units. So that's kind of what we'd have to touch on Title 20, but also to as far as ERUs, sewer connection fees, that sort of thing. This bill limits charging a sleeping unit to 0.5 of a dwelling unit. And so we're going to have some discussions with Public Works and Finance to update Title 13 and any rate tables. But in the last week or so, that's what I have found. And so I'll start drafting something up and bring it back.
Eric, any questions on that one?
Not on that one. No.
Okay. All right. So I had a couple additional ones real quick. One of them is just a kind of a memory thing, but I had a person in town give me a call saying, did we change our sign ordinance because they noticed that one of the developers is basically advertising through the flags. And so they were just going, no, we haven't changed it. And so they were just concerned that that might be prevalent coming back again. So
by flags, you mean the tall ones? Those?
Yeah, not a flag post. The ones that
Feather signs.
Feather signs. Thank you.
Yeah. So we were down a code enforcement officer for a little while, and we recently filled that position. So it's possible that that with training our new person and getting them up to speed, that sign enforcement has been a little on the back burner. But I will mention that to them, and and have them look into it. A lot of sign enforcement is complaint driven, other than the temporary signs in the right of way, as you're driving along the roadside. So if they're not made aware of it, they're not out looking for that sort of thing. So
No,
if you see it, let us know, and we'll
Well,
put it on the to-do list.
I put it on the Click It, I reminded him about Click It, Fix It. I mean, it's a great tool to use. My other one was, I know we've covered it and talked about it, but could you refresh me about what was going on with our discussion regarding neighborhood shops? I mean, it was a discussion item. We hadn't done anything with it about the ability to have a store in the neighborhood. That seems to have gotten some more momentum in other locations. And I know we talked about it or mentioned it at one of our meetings. Does this ring a bell or?
Yeah, it rings a bell. I know there's actually some pending or some legislation that's
Mhm.
probably going to get introduced next session on this. So we're probably going to get another mandate that we allow these sort of things even in our residential zones, which I think that's been the challenge, is that we have a neighborhood mixed use zone that we have applied at certain intersections in our neighborhoods. But that also allows for, like mixed use shopfront type buildings. And so this, what I'm hearing out of the state maybe is going to be a little bit different and will provide some more flexibility. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I don't even know whether it would apply to a city like Port Orchard, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah,
Okay.
Nick.
I was just curiosity.
Yeah, Nick was spot on there. There was legislation last year. It was
Mhm.
not friendly. AWC pushed back on it. The bill died, but it's probably going to come back in some
Right.
form. And that's why, we're part of the Association of Washington Cities, is they've got lobbyists that help us out, and our lobbyists too,
Yeah.
pitches in on this stuff that, we want to, I guess, have our, what am I trying to say here? These mandates from the state are just wrong. Local control is what, for us to have determine what, if we want to do this, then great, we should be able to do that. And if we don't, then we shouldn't have to, because if our community doesn't want it.
Mhm. No, I just was, it just was in the back of my mind on that. I was just curious where we were. I'm done. Eric, what do you got?
Yeah, couple things real quick. Maybe because it's the season right now and everyone's outside, but a lot of questions on pickleball. Is Gibbons, are we on track? Are we on schedule on that?
September 8th, 1 o'clock is the ribbon
Right.
cutting. I just drove by it today.
September
It's
8th, 1 o'clock.
looking dynamite.
Yeah.
They've got the court all painted, and
Yeah, Eric, did you get the email or for that? Because if
I did.
check your email.
I did. I just want to make
Okay.
sure, because people they're asking. And then, in the paper probably a couple weeks ago, that indoor facility that was kind of mentioned. Is there any update on that? Is that actually happening, or is this
Yeah, they applied for permits.
They did. Okay.
So we met with them several months ago, and at that meeting, we explained that there were some site planning challenges, as well as the concept building they put forward didn't meet our architectural design standards for commercial buildings in that location. So I believe they revised the site plan to comply with most requirements, but I think that the building is still pretty far from the mark, and so they haven't applied for the building permit yet, but the building they're showing in their site plan set, and its footprint and the articulation and modulation and just the massing of the building isn't allowed in that location. And so, when we met with them months ago, we provided an example. There's a place called in Lacey called, I think, 23 Kitchens, or some number of kitchens. And
Yeah,
it is
is.
fantastic. They have garage doors that roll up for the courts for nice days. They have a food truck parking outside, and kind of like a festival grounds and a pub. And I think that what is in Lacey would certainly fly under the Port Orchard design standards. What they've shown now is just a big metal building without any windows or articulation.
There.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all I got.
Anything else for the good of the order? I appreciate the discussion today. It's very helpful in the way we're moving forward. So thank you very much. Miss Scott today and some of it, but he'll catch up, I'm sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Adios.